Welcome to the Recovery.com podcast. I'm Dr. Mala, and today I'm joined by my fellow host, Cliff McDonald. Hi, Cliff.
Hi, Dr. Mala. Thanks for having me here today. I'm excited and grateful to be here.
Of course, thank you. Today, we're honored to sit down with Chad Koller. Chad is the Vice President of Substance Use Disorder Services at Foundations Recovery Network and has a wealth of experience in healthcare leadership and a profound commitment to transforming the lives of those affected by addiction. Chad, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I will second Cliff. I am excited and grateful.
Oh, thank you. So let's jump right in. Can you take us through your journey? You know, what was your path that brought you to this work? And, what are some of the things that you faced through your life? I know it's been an extensive journey, so I'd love to share that with our listeners and, of course, hear it from you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, I think like many folks, the reason why I do this work and I'm in this field is just because of a personal connection with recovery through my family, a long history of alcoholism and addiction. And while, my father and my brothers, very smart, very loving, very capable people, all really struggled with addiction at times in their life. And there really was a point with one of my brothers where it felt like life and death. I'm sure a lot of folks who have family members who have struggled with addiction can relate to the feeling of, man, am I going to get that call one day and they're going to say your brother, your family member is no longer with us. And again, my brother, smart, funny, caring, just such a good person, but in the grips of addiction, there's just a sense of powerlessness. He's doing great. He went to treatment a couple of years ago, did a year in sober living. He's bought a second house. He has 2 kids. He's adopting a kid. He's been married, just crushing it at life. And that's kind of a little like microcosm of, I think, the fulfillment that I get doing the work on a professional level is that doing this work, you see a lot of really, really good quality folks that are impacted by this disorder and their lives in shambles. And within a really short period of time, the restorative power of recovery is so profound that they can go on and heal the family, succeed professionally, accomplish all these things that just seemed like a faraway dream in their active addiction. And to be part of that process is just incredibly powerful, incredibly fulfilling.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And, again, I'm glad that your brother is doing well. I'm glad that you're doing well. So what would you say were the pivotal moments or key experiences that solidified that commitment that you're talking about?
I'm even just looking at my little brother's story. He did a year in sober living after treatment, and that's really where the rubber meets the road when folks utilize the full continuum of care, as opposed to kind of like picking and choosing. Okay, I'll do this, but I'll do this, I'll do this, and that's one thing that means a lot to me kind of professionally is making sure that we can provide the full continuum of care, making sure that if someone, let's say, enters treatment at the detox level of care, there's residential, there's PHP, there's a housing component, robust alumni program, because we know that addiction doesn't happen overnight. Addiction doesn't take place in a 30-day time period, right? It's oftentimes years and years and years. And recovery is a process much the same way. It can't just be an event. It can't just be 30 days. It really needs to be the full continuum of services. You really have to create that community where folks can connect with their peers. That's what works.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. And I definitely want to dive into that a little bit more in terms of the programming and the structure of everything. What would you say, or can you describe the turning point or significant shift that propelled you from, the work in the field to administration and leadership? Because I know you've done it all, right? Yeah.
So I was in South Florida, which was a prolific treatment center area with a lot of really fantastic treatment centers and some really bad actors. So, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about that because that was a fascinating experience. But yeah, I started as a tech making $10 an hour, run around doing the rounds. And I really enjoyed the work just because as a tech, you have so much face time with the patients, more so than, sometimes the therapist or the doctors, the nurses. And it just kind of spoke to me, just to, be able to connect with people, be part of that process. And then I just knew I wanted to do more. I wanted to do more. So I went and got a degree in mental health counseling and kind of pursued that piece. I didn't realize how much documentation was required to be a therapist. I'm like, dang, this is a lot,
Yeah.
But when I was in grad school for that, I continued to work in the field, which I really recommend that to folks. If you have the ability to pursue your education while you're working in the field, you just connect the dots in
Yeah.
a way that is, I think, pretty helpful. So I was a case manager. I remember when I was a tech and they had fired the case manager that day, very suddenly, something had happened and she was out. They said, "Hey, Chad, you think you're ready? You think you can do it?" I'm like, put me in, put me in. And I had no idea what to do.
Love it. Love it. Yeah.
And then was a director of operations. So really kind of went along that leadership operational route, which is, I think, again, very rewarding just to be a leader of people, right? You manage processes, but you lead people, and seeing when you have that core group of people that are capable and very passionate about the work, what can be accomplished. You guys probably experienced that with your organization. I mean, it's just so cool when you have that team of rock stars and everyone's kind of heading the same direction, with the goal of making sure people have access to life-saving care.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Chad, so much of what you're speaking about resonates with me. I think we have a lot in common. I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, and my progression was late. My drug of choice was alcohol, and I started drinking when I was 13 years old, ran with a pretty scrappy crowd. But I kind of lived this double life. I come from a culture. My dad was a New England heavyweight boxing champion, All-American college football player. And I was a very good student athlete and also kind of secretly living this life of, getting drunk on the weekends. But that progression didn't really happen to me until it really negatively impacted my life until my mid-40s. And I know when I see ears with guys like you to stay away, those are guys you want on your team. I've been on some championship teams, and I love what you were just talking about when you get people with an aligned mission. So I'm going to go a little bit off on a different theme here. I was also a wrestler, and I was probably a better wrestler than a football player. I was a state runner-up my senior year. I was third my junior year. I decided to play college football. In wrestling rooms, there's a poster you see a lot with Dan Gable, legendary coach from Iowa, that says, once you've wrestled, everything else in life is easy.
Yeah.
Right? You've heard, obviously you know about Dan Gable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wrestling is really hard. Recovery's harder. Mm-hmm. Early recovery is hard. And Chad, there's a persona of usually male, right? Very often an athlete or someone who's had a ton of success. And they live with this kind of code of rugged individualism, right? I'm a self-made guy. My self-will, right? I'm going to make it happen. And, all that stuff. I had lived that way. And I didn't rely on a power greater than myself. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that guy.
Yeah.
That guy a bunch, right? That guy is real, right? Yeah. You know a lot of these guys, I bet, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk to me about that a little bit. Would love to hear your thoughts on that persona.
One thing I've heard recently, I love it, is your ego is not your amigo. And I think there's something about, the right sizing of the ego and saying, okay, it's not all on me to figure it out. When I was up at Skywood, we did this really cool event with the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we had a lot of ex-NFL players, and that same archetype that you're describing. And it, so fascinating. I think with men, potentially, especially, there's this, no, I don't go to therapy. I don't need that. I'll just figure it out. Sometimes you just gotta keep on pushing forward. There's this, and like, that's not really helpful. We have to normalize that it's okay to talk about this stuff. It's okay to reach out for help. You don't have to figure this all out on your own. So yeah, I think you're spot on. In fact, like, the most courageous thing you can do is say, hey, listen, I'm really struggling and I need help here. I think it takes more courage to do that than to remain silent.
Yeah, one of our core values here at Recovery.com is vulnerability, and we really try and walk the walk and talk the talk, and celebrate when people are reinforcing our core values. That said, though, Chad, that was not something that was promoted for me early. In fact, I can remember, my dad, and I hit the jackpot with my father. He was a wonderful guy. We lost him early 2004. He was 55 years old. I think he died of alcoholism. That's my personal opinion. Some people like to say he had a heart attack, but I think his behaviors contributed to that. But one of the things that my dad shared with me when I was young, and I was an empath, I was a feeler. I wanted peace. I loved people. I loved animals. I didn't want to hurt anyone. And I was emotional a lot. And I can remember hearing, right, I'll give you something to cry about. That's an odd message, right? Did you grow up in a culture like that a little bit?
So my father, who actually died about 15 years ago of suicide, very successful physician, and just, I mean, a brilliant doctor, a brilliant neurologist, brilliant researcher, who had a lot of success in life, but he suffered from depression, and he suffered silently. This was a big surprise to the family. So while that message wasn't explicitly said to me and my brother, it was modeled, right? And instead of saying, hey, I'm struggling with my mental health, and this is what I'm going to do about it, and as men, that's okay, and that's what you should do. I think he just suffered silently, and just, like, such a sad thing.
But Chet, that caught me off guard, that you just shared something really personal and intimate. Are you okay talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So did you guys have warning signs? Like had he tried that before? Like, did you know that he, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
And yet you had already been doing this work.
It was very early. I think it was very early in my career. So yeah, I was probably I was just kind of like into it, and it really reinforced this. We know that mental health and addiction, they oftentimes don't exist, and they don't exist in a vacuum, right? There's always this interrelationship. But yeah, it was one of those things that you just you think about over the course of your life. You're like, oh, are there things I could have done? Is there things that we should have seen? And when someone outwardly shows, looks like they're very successful, it's just very hard to pinpoint that. And kind of going back, Cliff, to your point, I think especially as men, and maybe men who have achieved some success or kind of have that kind of archetype you're talking about, folks don't like to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, that we in the rooms, you hear a lot. When I say the rooms, I'm a 12-step guy. I go to meetings all the time. I went to a meeting this morning. I'm at a conference in Arizona. They had a 12-step meeting this morning. It's at the Behavioral Health Tech Conference, and it was just wonderful. I'm completely comfortable now identifying as an empath and a feeler. And I need people, man. I need friends, right? I need teammates. I need fellowship. And I'm comfortable saying now, like, I want to connect with someone, right? But so many guys, Chad, like, I have guys like that I reach out to now because they're not reaching out, and my dad, like, I don't know if my dad ever called a friend on the telephone.
Yeah.
Right?
A different era too, like the generation of our parents, I would say, collectively, all of us in this room, they aren't coming from a generation where you talk about it, right? So that perpetuated the stigma. But yeah, Cliff, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please, Dr. Muller, you're the clinical expert here. So in the rooms, what you hear a lot is our secrets keep us sick.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we suffer in silence. And I think that archetype, Chad, yeah, I forgot the right word. I was thinking persona, the archetype, right? It's like the quiet hero, right? The lone wolf.
Yeah, the lone wolf, right? It's so like romanticized.
Yeah, the alpha male,
Yeah.
right? And the hero's journey is such a cool thing with Joseph Campbell, right? Of like you're born into this normal world and you cross the threshold and you learn these lessons. The end of the hero's journey typically is you come back, you cross the threshold back to the normal world, and you went to the dark world and you learned the valuable lesson, and you come back and you can share it. Chad, you're sharing it. So many of our brothers don't get to share it.
Mhm.
And you see this in military a lot too, because they they're not here with us
Yeah.
to share the lesson.
That's
So your brother, sorry, Dr. Mal, I was just thinking, Chad, your brother, was his addiction, like his real hard challenges, was that after your dad's death?
Yeah.
Did you see a change?
Yeah.
Was he medicating, do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm a big believer that a lot of addictive behaviors is self-medication. It's that kind of avoidance of this really uncomfortable feeling, avoidance of suffering. And when folks first start, it works well. And then there's all these issues that come along with it, right?
yeah, yeah. So that's a good segue into lessons learned, right? Reflecting on your journey, what have been some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned that not only personally, but also that have integrated into your work as a result?
But kind of like what we're talking about a little bit, that I love that you're still connected to 12-step recovery. My little brother is as well. There's such a need, I think, as people, we're pack animals, to have community, to have this sense of community. And so professionally, one thing we're doing at Foundations Recovery Network is this big push for this robust alumni program. So we have, it's just like such a cool thing.
So needed. Yeah.
Yeah, so needed, so needed. We have dedicated alumni coordinators at all our facilities, so they're connecting. We actually have an alumni app. You can download it from the App Store, and there's that peer support. So how can we create spaces for community, for peer support, for folks who are outside of that kind of acute treatment environment to connect and support each other? And I think that the next evolution of this for Foundations Recovery Network is to do the same thing for the family of loved ones who have been through treatment or are struggling or in recovery.
That's
Yeah,
so
Chad,
great.
I'd love to hear that. Every Monday night, I join a virtual
Yeah.
12-step meeting. It's called Dartmouth Dr. Bob. So I went to Dartmouth College. I played football there, Ivy League school, really high performing guys, business leaders, investment bankers, consultants. A lot of them were good athletes too. So many of these guys have gotten banged up,
Yeah.
and they, and they lost their battle with drinking or whatever it might be. And we get together, and because there's more of that common experience, I think it's an even safer space.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. Bill Wilson is the founder of AA. The number two guy, Dr. Bob, was a Dartmouth graduate.
Oh, that's awesome.
He was a medical doctor, right? So we connect, and that fellowship is great. I went to the Plymouth House, Chad, twice,
Okay.
which is a 12-step place in New Hampshire. I AMA'd the first time, right? Because I'm terminally unique, and I know. And then I went back there, and finally the lights came on. They're owned by Guardian Network now.
Yeah.
And they're putting together an alumni program that they've asked me to be involved with, and I'm super excited about that. I'm surprised that many of the providers don't have good alumni programs.
Right.
And they're kind of just thinking now, like, hey, that's something we should do. Have you guys tried that in the past? Like, is this a new initiative?
I think we're revitalizing it
Okay.
under my leadership. So FRN did have the Heroes in Recovery, and it just lost, I think, a little bit of momentum over the years. So we're really putting some energy and focus and effort into it. And then taking it a step further with the family piece, I was actually having lunch with one of my mentors who lives here in Tennessee, and his daughter has just struggled with addiction just for many years now. and they come from a successful family, educated family, and in that circle, that's not really something you talk about with your friends and your colleagues and your peers. You know, if one of your family members gets cancer, everyone just surrounds you with support and love. But if someone has an addictive disorder, it oftentimes has a little different feel to it.
100%. Yeah.
As we talk, this is such a small world sometimes with the Guardian Recovery folks I worked with when I was down in Delray Beach. Know those guys very well. And then I was at the last NATAP conference, and uh, Bob Ferguson, he's highly involved there. So it's just so cool to hear all the great work folks are doing in this field.
Yeah, we were blessed on this podcast to have Marvin Ventrell.
Yeah.
Yes, and Marvin is someone in long-term recovery. I was surprised to learn, like, he values lived experience so much, which is really reinforcing because he's a very smart guy with a lot of letters after his name, and he respects the clinical stuff, of course, too. But it was really great to get his perspective on things from such a successful leader. So
I love what they're doing with their outcome study. I think that is such a good thing. We're participating in that. Is let's look at some national level outcomes so we can more clearly define what clinical success looks like.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's that subgroup force is, I believe, what it is, right? FORS. Yeah. I love that, and how awesome that we get, partners that are willing to donate their data.
Yes.
Like we're all in this together, and a rising tide lifts all boats is the spirit that a lot of people bring to this, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
It starts to create a little bit more credibility for our field. I think addiction treatment has been tarnished to some degree by some of the bad actors. And horror stories, I'm sure we've all. And the data piece, I think, is so important. We're doing a lot of that. One nice thing about UHS is that we track a lot of data. So when you say this is top quality treatment, it's like, it's not my opinion. This is what the data says, right? Because everyone says, oh, we do this. And unless you have outcomes to support it, I'm always a little bit skeptical.
Right. No, I think the research and the data is so needed, and the outcomes. I always get excited whenever I see movement in that direction. So I totally echo what you're saying. So that brings me to the question of foundational principles. Let's talk about the core philosophy behind FRN and how it shapes your approach to addiction treatment.
Yeah, no, those are a great question. And there's definitely some pillars that create that foundation. I think the first one is that treating the whole patient, right? I think if kind of going back to the earlier point, if you look at addiction just as this separate component in the vacuum of what it means to be a person, you're really doing the patient a grave disservice. And that's one of the things that first attracted me to Foundation's Recovery Network, because they were a leader in co-occurring treatment before that was really even a thing. They're mentioned in SAMHSA's Tip 42 as the gold standard in co-occurring treatment, which I think is such a great thing. So yeah, really looking at the mental health piece, looking at the social determinants of health, housing stability, looking at the trauma piece. I'm sure you're familiar with the ACEs and how that is a significant predictor of addiction and mental health concerns. Really creating an experience that is just really enriching. I know, Cliff, you've been to Skywood in Michigan, which is an FRN property, and it's on 300 acres. Folks go fishing. We have a climbing wall, fire pit. There's just an ability to create this really robust, really nurturing experience that touches on all these domains that we know are drivers of the addictive process.
Skywood.
Here, Chad, I've actually referred people over there. So yeah.
Oh, that's right, Dr. Molly, you're from Michigan. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, Skywood is gorgeous, and yeah, I really enjoyed my time there. I could it seems like a great place to recover, right? With abundant resources. And Chad, it's interesting, the behavioral healthcare provider landscape, right? You've got big, national, regional, global providers like you guys, right? Publicly traded company, and your company has performed well as a publicly traded company. Is your group, Chad, Foundations, is that a self-operating entity? Like, how does that business work? Was that an acquisition from
Yeah.
UHS? I would love to learn more from the business perspective.
Yeah, it was an acquisition, and there's some additional kind of standalone addiction treatment centers we've added under that umbrella, but we function as a standalone addiction services division of UHS. And
Okay, so are you guys the addiction SUD arm of UHS? Okay, got it. Okay, so they set up their business by specialization. So they've got primary mental health, they've got SUD. Okay.
Yeah. So we're that service line that focuses on SUD. And this has been good. I mean, UHS, I moved from South Florida up to Michigan for the CEO position at Skywood. This is in the middle of winter. It was like, I remember February 19th, and right after the polar vortex, where it was, maybe you remember this, where it was like negative 20 degrees.
Yep.
Sitting by the pool in Delray Beach, Florida, looking at the weather in Michigan, and like, this is unreal.
Oh, yeah.
I was driving up there, and I had this moment. It was me and my dog in my truck, and probably like northern Indiana, northern Illinois. I just had this like, what am I doing moment? And it turned out to be the best decision I'd made professionally.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I was kind of so compelled to be a part of UHS was they have, they're an ethical organization, and there was just so much shenanigans down in South Florida. And I was lucky never to be associated or never to work for any of those organizations, but you just saw some really shady, some really terrible things. And also the size and resources of UHS, that as the SUD specialty division, we're part of the largest provider of behavioral health in the country. So we have so much support and so much expertise around that mental health component. I think there's a lot of addiction providers that do the addiction, the SUD piece really well. And then the mental health piece, maybe it's not as well developed. So at FRN, because of UHS, we just have these two pieces that work so well together.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And yeah, you made the opposite type of move of most people. Most people go the other direction.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you in Michigan now, Chad? Is that home for you?
I'm in Tennessee, right outside Nashville.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of companies in Tennessee and Nashville in behavioral health, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are you at corporate?
Yeah, we have a small corporate office here. The main corporate office is in King of Prussia.
Great. And tell us about Foundations. So is that the full continuum of care? Is that what do you guys do? I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah. So we have everything from standalone outpatients in a couple markets to large residential facilities like Skywood. So really offering the full continuum from detox to IOP. We've really focused on the sober living piece as well. We've seen more patients come in with needs around housing, and I think that sober living piece, again, kind of going back to the sense of community, it's a cool thing when you have folks there that are living together, that have that shared purpose around recovery.
Yeah, the challenge there, Chad, and this is a tough one, right, is will payers pay for that?
Yeah.
So that we could spend a lot of time on that. So could you talk about that a little bit, right? Because, historically it's been like, hey, we'll pay for 28 days and then see you later, good luck.
Yeah.
Are there positive changes underway there, Chad? You're on the front lines. Like, you could probably teach us of what's cooking there.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. What are some of the biggest strategic challenges you face?
And I think it's definitely a trend I've seen is pressure from the payers to treat more folks at the outpatient level of care as opposed to higher levels of care. I think with that trend, the payers are going to start to understand the value of the sober living piece. Most payers will not pay for it. And in very few markets, very few instances do we see payers wanting to support that piece of treatment.
So when you guys do great residential, right? And then step down. So is it typically they'll get, the payer will cover residential,
Yep.
or the majority of it, and then is it kind of, you're on your own? So you're trying to help you do affordable sober living, kind of out of pocket? Is that usually kind of how it goes?
Yeah. And
Okay.
you have to be very mindful of the compliance and kind of regulatory and parameters around the sober living piece. But yeah, absolutely. We're trying to remove as many barriers for folks as possible. Yeah. And then and it looks different in different centers. Some we have really good relationships with sober livings in the community. Some we own and operate. Some we lease and staff. So it looks very different across the board. But the things we're looking for is folks have a safe place to be, create that sense of community. I think it's so helpful because we know there's so many environmental behavioral cues that I remember when I was an early clinician with the clinical directors. She's like, if you take a rock out of like a muddy puddle and you clean it off and then you put it right back in the puddle, like, was that very effective? You're like, oh, you're right. The environment has such a powerful impact on how people behave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sure does. There's a classic. I studied psychology, and there's the Stanford prison experiment.
Yes,
Are you
yes.
familiar with that? Right. So you take, normal, high functioning, kind, thoughtful people, put them in an environment, and they say, hey, you have to act like a prison guard for 2 weeks, and the behaviors change so fast.
Yeah.
Because of environment. It is crazy that we'd think, someone has a habit for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you say, go do this thing for 28 days and you're going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It just doesn't work. And we know that the only correlation historically, outcomes have been such a challenge, but length of time in treatment does correlate with positive outcomes. Chad, what are you doing? We're talking a lot about outcomes and trying to, capture good data, like the NAATP force thing. Do you guys try to stay connected with folks that are patients and measure outcomes after they leave? How do you do that?
So it's definitely more developed when folks are in treatment. So we do symptom abatement. So look at the PHQ-9, the GAD-7, brief craving scale. So different domains that measure depression, craving, anxiety. And it's really cool when you see these on the graph. You see when folks come in, it's like all super high, and then middle of their stay, it's lower, and then on discharge. And then with our new EHR and our new alumni apps, we're really trying to leverage technology to better collect outcomes after folks have discharged the program. It's always so interesting too, when I go to like the NATAP conferences and we're talking about outcomes, like how do you define success?
Right.
Because there's, some folks are very abstinence-based approach. There's a harm reduction approach. There's an approach where you look at more like functional impairment as opposed to the usage of the drug. So I think that's all pretty fascinating discussions and conversations that we're having within the field.
That's amazing. So when you're looking at the outcomes, like how are you translating that for patients and maintaining kind of that patient-centric focus?
Yeah. Well, one, it gives us a good indication of acuity across markets. So one thing that I've noticed is in Michigan, you might see a lot of alcohol use disorder, but maybe you don't see a lot of fentanyl. We operate Calvary Healing Center. I got the little product placement in Arizona. And in Arizona, we see a lot of fentanyl and a lot of opiate use disorder. So folks come in different areas with different needs. And so we're incorporating using data to better identify what the needs are, put interventions in place, And then the data tells us, is it working? Is it not working? Do we need to pivot? So just looking at all these different pieces that tell us the story of what the needs are and is the treatment effective?
That's absolutely great. So with that, what are some of the most promising innovations that you see coming or that you might be even currently exploring to help with this field?
Yeah, I think there's a shift to more integrated treatment where it's looking at the medical piece, looking at the mental health piece. As we have a conversation earlier this week where there's still some treatment centers, not in our group, but out there nationally, that haven't embraced MAT when there's all this research and all this scientific evidence to support efficacy. Having at the Calvary Healing Center with the xylazine and the fentanyl we're seeing down there, we're seeing more patients come in with kind of wound care type issues. So the conversation is, how do we get better at treating that, right? You never want to deflect a patient who needs life-saving addiction care because of a wound. So how can we get better at that? How can we be more developed at incorporating medical services?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. And that kind of is a segue into my next question, which is the future of addiction treatment. Where do you see the future of addiction treatment heading over the next decade? And, what are your hopes for it?
Yeah, I think my hope would be more alignment between the payers and the providers. I think it looks different, whether that's value-based care. I think there just needs to be more alignment. At times, it feels like there's a little bit of tension, and some tension is healthy, right? I think we're heading towards more integrated care, where someone can go to a treatment center. And one of our VPs at UHS, he's over the OUD, the methadone. He calls it the four-door clinic.
Hmm.
Have MAT, psychiatry, physical health. It's just like, how can we create these really kind of comprehensive wraparound services? So I have to get this piece here, this piece here. Hopefully I can get this piece over there.
Yeah, doing it all together in one space and truly integrating. That's one of my favorite words. I'm so passionate about integration, true integration, and treatment that really is allowing for these different disciplines to come together and actually discuss, not only the progression but the outcomes to be able to better serve patients. And I think that's phenomenal that you guys are focusing on that. That's so great. That's so great.
So probably the two other pieces. One, telehealth. COVID, that exploded, right?
Sure.
And I think there was a lot of apprehension with clinicians. Is this going to be effective? And what we've seen is there's a lot of folks that love that telehealth
Oh yeah.
patient side model. It's convenient. It creates that sense of community. It's accessible. So we have some outpatients that do 50% telehealth type services.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
How do you see that becoming more robust and, not to use the same word more than once, but integrated into, our day-to-day and even outreach? I again, personally, I actually went virtual well before COVID. So when everything happened with COVID, I was like, yeah, we got this, like this is fine. But and it's so exciting to see that we're now, keeping that as an option. What do you envision? How do you see it getting even more integrated into the system and outreach wise, and even in Michigan, places like Michigan, there's so many rural areas. I get excited that we can now provide services there, in those types of areas too. So what do you see?
I think better technology. You need these platforms to offer telehealth to kind of enable the process or the service delivery model. We have this alumni app. So just how do you integrate these technology platforms to allow you to connect with more folks and to make receiving services a little bit easier, a little bit more convenient, a little bit more effective?
Here. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
It'll be interesting how AI
Yes.
changes the landscape. I mean, we're even looking at some EMRs where, the as an AI component that will look at the summary of what's typed in there, that can, give recommendations on treatment modalities. I think AI will be transformative, really across pretty much any industry. It'll be super cool to see what it does for the SUD space.
For sure, for sure. I was just gonna say, where do you sit with AI, and how are you guys integrating it in already? Is it, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chad. Our company, Recovery.com, you're familiar with it. You've used it, right? So our goal is to be the best place online in the world to help people seeking behavioral health care treatment with the right provider at the right time, so that matches better, so the outcomes are better. Our business is growing rapidly. We're providing great value to many people. That said, Chad, there are still many providers that don't use the internet, right? Because they're just laggards, and they're still doing it the way they used to, which is usually business development people in the field, right? And referrals, which is wonderful. But we see what we think are the most progressive companies that are willing to innovate and use the tools that are available. And then you can diversify, right, the sources of your people that you get to help. So I don't need to ask you about that because you guys have been on board for a while. But it's really fascinating to see the pace at which people are willing to adopt change or even consider it, right? Some of us are set in our ways more than others.
I think you guys do a great job at Recovery.com, even just how you present the information, because there's a lot of folks out there that aren't, I don't know the right way to say, like educated consumers of treatment, right? They don't know the difference between CBT and DBT, so they need organizations like Recovery.com to present the information in a way that's a little bit more consumable so that they can make the right choice for themselves or their family member.
Well, thank you. I promise I wasn't fishing for compliments there, but we want to be very comprehensive, right? We want to have as much information as possible, information that's accurate, information that's helpful. We want to have reviews. This is hard. Anyone who lands on our site is not in a great place, right? And we said no one got there on a winning streak, and trying to make it easy. You can thank Dr. Mala and her team, right? So she's the editor-in-chief of Recovery Media. Her team creates great content. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that facilitates the experience. So really appreciate the kind words, Chad. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Cliff, for that highlight. Yeah, one thing that we're definitely passionate about is not only making information accessible across all walks of the journey, but even taking a couple of steps back from that. We're really wanting to enhance and redefine, if you will, the concept of recovery literacy.
Yes.
So any way we can do that, and any suggestions you ever have, we're open, because again, it's all about meeting people wherever they're at in their journey to connect them to that treatment. So yeah,
that recovery literacy, I think that's for the consumer, for someone looking for treatment, that's such an important piece.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I know you've got some personal mottos that you mentioned also: be in service to others, leave your ego at the door. How do these principles manifest in your day-to-day and outside of your work? How do you kind of how do you balance it all?
Yeah. The be of service to others, I think, is so important. I heard a phrase the other day, talking about one of the teammates, like, oh, this individual has a heart of service. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're going for. Going back to like where some of the foundational principles, when a patient comes to a center like Skywood or any other FRN, we need to treat that individual like they're our guest, right? There just needs to be this outpouring of compassion and empathy. Like what Cliff said, you don't get to treatment on a winning streak. And usually folks are beating themselves up pretty bad, so how can you just really be that person that is, provides that support and that compassion, that understanding? And as a leader, I really ascribe to servant leadership. There's almost a parallel process there when it comes to leading a team, where you want to create an environment where folks feel supported, where folks are able to feel vulnerable. Like you guys said that about your organization, where folks take risk and no one feels like they have to be perfect. My job is to make sure that the people that report up to me are successful and have the resources to do their job to the best of their ability. So yeah, that the heart of service, be of service to others, is such an important piece, I think, just in the world in general.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So how do you balance it all? I know you've got a husky, right? That you spend time with. Tell us, and what advice would you give to balance, for balancing, or even just work-life integration? Yeah.
I mean, for me, exercise is a big part of how I manage the stress of being an executive. So I box and I wrestle and do a little bit of Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Nice.
Yeah, I had a couple of MMA fights like that.
Nice. Very nice.
Dr. Mala's husband, you guys could spend a lot of time there. So
yeah. My husband is also, he's a belt holder, and he's been in the profession. That's his job. He's a professional martial artist. So I'm sure you guys would love to talk. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, exercise is so powerful. I was reading a study that exercise helped reduce the length of time for post-acute withdrawal symptoms. Like just moving your body helps your brain heal, helps your brain be its healthiest.
Yeah. No, I love it. I would love to see, this is actually something that he and I have also worked on, is really integrating martial arts as a recovery-based tool. And we have a couple of programs that we've implemented with the military and across other facilities too. And I'd love to see more of that in our treatment centers and just in the field in general. So I love that you're in it. That's so great.
That's so cool. I was reading an article, I think it was for the military population, and it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think diagnosis was a PTSD type diagnosis, and it was effective, right? I mean, that's like such a cool thing. How can what like behavioral interventions can we layer on with education type interventions?
Yes.
Folks really feel better.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I could go on talking to you about that. Well, for sake of time, we usually land on a last question, our favorite question. But before I do, Cliff, did you have anything else? I know we always want to ask more, but did you have anything else that you wanted to
No, Dr. Mala, I could spend a lot of time with Chad, and we have lots of shared interests and passions. And Chad, thanks again for everything and for being here today and making the time for us. And I look forward to reconnecting again, and we'll do that. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So
our last question is, what does recovery mean to you?
I conceptualize addiction as a disease of disconnectedness, disconnected from others, disconnected from self, disconnected from a higher power. So really what recovery means to me is connectedness. Going back to the sense of community, the higher power piece, connecting to your own values, your own path. So yeah, I would say connectedness.
I love it. Thank you so much. And it has been a pleasure to connect with you. And I know this isn't going to be the last time. So I'm looking forward to future connections with you as well. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.